I'm the associate director of the missions team, and I'm also the director of church starting, and we also are involved with replanting. All of that's not enough, so I, just as a hobby, I help with the revitalization effort with Texas Baptist because so many churches are in need of revitalization. So I help in that area. It's not really my responsibility, but I just love churches. And then just to add to it, I'm now the interim pastor of a church in Azle. I don't even know if I've told y'all that yet or not. Ash Creek Baptist Church in Azle, Texas. That's north of Fort Worth, where I live, not too far from where I am. So glad to be here. I've shared some of this before. If you've seen me before here, most of you may not have, but I have before. I've updated it some, and there's some other stuff, and we're going to try to keep it as fresh as possible. I double-checked my numbers recently. Let me tell you when I double-checked the numbers, so make sure we got as up-to-date at 5:30 this morning. So that's as close as I can get to the numbers, all right? I'm not giving you data from 2014 or anything like that. It is data from today as much as we can get. Obviously, we don't have everything up to date because there's a lag in us understanding things. But what I want to talk about is where Texas is now, where Texas is headed. I titled it Texas 2030 so that we can get a picture of where Texas is going. But do you realize how far out 2030 is? That seems like a long time away. I remember when I was a kid, the year 2000 seemed impossible. The year 2020, and that was just Buck Rogers, right? 2030 is 4.5 years from now. That's crazy, isn't it? We're now below 4.75 years. We're below 5-year runtime now to get to 2030. And so, and then right after that everything will keep growing. So I'm going to talk about Texas in general, but I'm going to try to talk a little bit more specific about San Antonio, maybe Austin, kind of the general area here, so that we can see things. Some of it's demographical. It's almost kind of, you either really love this stuff and you're a nerd about it. You know who you are, right? Or this isn't your cup of tea. If it's not what you want to hear, I promise we're going to get through some of that information to get the real practical stuff. That what do we do with this information? So we're going to look at some stats and just the situation of where we are as Texas and why things are growing very fast. This is the class participation time. By show of hands, how many of you have noticed there's a lot of people moving to Texas, right? There's a lot of people moving to my neighborhood. Does that feel like that? There's a lot of people out there on 410 and 35 and I-10. And you're even late getting here today because everybody showed up in your town, right? And everybody feels that way all across the state. All big parts of the state is dealing with that. So I'm going to kind of just jump into it and just look at some stats. But I'm going to start with a picture. This is Malachi. This is my grandson. It snowed up in Dallas-Fort Worth a few weeks ago. This picture is about 3 weeks old. This is my daughter, Julia. And this is Malachi, my grandson. And it was his first snow. He loved it for about 6 minutes, and then he was done with the snow, right? I show him for two reasons. One, because he's in the snow, and when it snows outside, we get to pick what is going on around us. And this affects us in how we deal with stuff. If it's snowing, most of the time in Texas, what's going to happen? Y'all tell me. It might not even ever touch the ground, right? If it snows here, how long is it going to last? Maybe a couple days, maybe. I mean, the real bad one we had, what was it, 4 years ago, where the whole state got ice, and we thought the world was coming in. It was really like 4 or 5 days, right? So if it snows in Texas, normally it's a snow shower. That means it's just snowing right now. What do we do if it's a snow shower? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm in the picture. Is that better? I get you. So if it is snowing in Texas, what do we do? What do you do? Stay home. What else do we do? We got to get milk, bread, and toilet paper, right? We got to go get those things. And get some, what's that? Go sledding. Well, we don't normally get enough for that, but every once in a while we will, all right? So if it's a snow shower, and typically we're going to wait it out. Hot cocoa, hot coffee, 2 days. We watch our movies. We get back to normal. That's what we do in Texas, right? Because snow doesn't really last that long, usually just a day or two at the most. But if it's a blizzard that's coming, and we know it's going to be, if we live in an area where there's blizzards, what will we do differently? What would you, if it's going to really be a really bad snow, there's going to be, when I was born in Detroit, Michigan. My mom is from Detroit, and we had a real bad winter when my sister was born. She was pregnant with my sister, who's 2 years younger, and we had 28-foot tall snowdrifts outside our house. Okay, what would you do differently if you were living in a blizzard instead of just a snowstorm? You're really prepared. You're going to have to make sure you're concerned. Whatever you got to do to have heat, you're going to make sure you have that. Now you're not just going and buying a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. You're going to sit it out a day or two. Now we're more prepared, whatever it needs to be. Now, if we know winter's coming, this isn't a blizzard. It's going to be all winter. I'll tell you what they do up north is they're chopping firewood all year long. Of course, we have central heating there now, but you got to plan if winter's coming. That's a whole nother ball game. And now, what if it's an ice age? What if the snow's coming and it's going to be here 1,000 years? What do we do? What? Amen, brother. We move. But what else? As a people, what does a people do when there's now an ice age, and it's going to be like that the rest of their lives, the rest of their children's lives, and the rest of their grandchildren's lives? What? You got to adapt. You have to have cultural changes, permanent cultural changes, permanent adaptations. I use this illustration for this reason. We're in an ice age, culturally and in the church age. The world has changed around us to never go back, and most of our churches are acting like it's a snow shower. That we're just doing a little bit of things. We're buying some bread and milk, and we're going to wait out the problems, and they're going to go back to normal. But the world has shifted around us. And we have to learn how to adapt as church. I didn't mean to do this. I do this almost every time I talk. The book I always recommend, I should get royalties from Todd Bolsinger, is Canoeing the Mountains. If you've heard me talk, you probably heard me reference that book. It's about adaptive changing. And I'm going to reference that later as well. So, all right, if we're looking around and we're trying to figure out which of these it is, let's talk about Texas specifically. Let's talk specifically about our population. I'm okay to stand here. Is that going to pick up if I do on this side? All right, I'll do that since I'll be on this side, not crossing the video. So Texas is going to grow by an additional 3.7 million people by the year 2030, which is 4 years away. Over 4.5 years away. So another 4 million people. Somebody with math, just general math, almost 4 million more people in almost 4 years. I'm rounding off both ways. How many more people are moving to Texas every year? Well, a bunch. Yeah, a million. Give or take. It's usually not quite a million. It's about 750 to 800,000 are either being born here or that's moving here. Net increase over those who are passing away and moving away. It's a net increase of about 750,000 to 800,000 a year. As time goes on, it's going to get bigger and faster. It's going to have a bigger head of steam as we go forward. The estimate of Texas, and this is now really all over the place. So I've seen estimates as low as 35 million. And I've seen estimates as high as 60 million. They're going to be in Texas by mid-century. That means another 25 million people, or 20 million people are moving to Texas in the next lifetime. Now, why bring this up? Well, this is the second reason I showed the picture of my grandson. I'm not talking about a far off time in the future that we don't need to worry about it. I'm talking about the Texas he's going to go to college in, that he's going to graduate high school and be ready to go face. And if I can't think about and prepare the world that my grandson and that your grandchildren or great-grandchildren are going to be inheriting, the Christian world, the church world, the cultural world, it's my role as the grandfather and as the father to prepare that for that generation that's coming next. I'm going to begin paying attention to, is it an ice age? Are we in a winter? What changes and adaptations do we need to have? Here's a few stats that I want to share. Houston's going to grow to about 9 million, maybe a little bit under by 2030. My joke about Houston is this. Houston is an hour away from Houston. If y'all ever driven down in Houston, I said that for about 3 or 4 years, and now I've changed it this year. I think I'm saying Houston is now 2 hours away from Houston. It's so big. We're going to look at Houston in just a moment. DFW is even going to be bigger, maybe as big as 10 million by the end of the decade. These are huge numbers. There's whole states. Most of our states don't have 10 million people in them. And we have all that in Dallas-Fort Worth. Austin, San Antonio is going to be around 6 million. I'll give you those specific stats on those cities the next slide that we get to. But about 6 million here, which actually represents the fastest growth of all three of those areas. The fastest growth is taking place in Austin and San Antonio. I don't have to tell you all that, right? All you got to do is drive around town and you see everywhere you look, they're building apartment complexes as far as you can see. They got housing development over there. They're building restaurants. I didn't know we needed as many Starbucks as we have and hamburger places. Why is it every time there's a new restaurant, it's a hamburger, a taco, or chicken fingers? That's all we eat, I guess, because every time I go, they're building one of those three. Do you know what they're not building? They're building schools. I don't see a whole lot of new churches going up. but we're going to add 4 million more people, and we're not adding any churches? That's where my interest is, of course. I'm director of church starting. Here's just a reference just to see where we are compared to California. In 2020, Texas had 29.3 million, and California had 39.3 million people. That's a difference of 10 million people. I know y'all are good at math. I said it anyway. In 2024, that just ended, Texas had 31.2 million people, and California had 39.4. They increased 100,000 people in 4 years. California has. In fact, they've had some of the years in the last 4, they've decreased in population. Some of the years they've increased. But I want y'all to do your math real quick with me. If Texas was 10 million behind California when the pandemic hit, they are now 8 million behind California. 8.2 million behind. We've outpaced California in population increase by 1.8 million people in 4 years. And that's the largest state in the country, population-wise. They won't be long. Just do that math, and you can triangulate and figure out how quickly we're going to pass California in population. Most estimates, it's going to be somewhere around 2042. Some estimates are saying we'll outpace California by 2035. A few crazy people say maybe even by 2030, 2031, we might outpace California. That's too quick. I've studied a lot of that stuff, but it looks like somewhere around 2040, 2045, somewhere in that range, we will have a lot larger population than California. We're 8 million behind now. Now, that's just an illustration to see how fast Texas is growing. This is a little bit more local for you guys. San Antonio is at 1.5 million. Y'all probably knew that, right? Everybody knew where San Antonio. Metropolitan area is 2.6 million. I checked it this morning. I know, here's the thing is you can look at stats and get different stuff, depends on where you pull it from. That's what it said this morning. The estimate is going to be 3 million in San Antonio by the year 2030. Does that sound right to y'all? Or y'all like, I don't know. You can say whatever you want to. You could have said 45 million in San Antonio. I don't know the difference, right? Austin's at 1 million. Not quite. It's just under. As of the end of the year last year, they are at 980,000 people. So 20,000 people away from 1 million in the city of Austin sometime late last year. So it's possible they've hit 1 million. Probably not yet, but they probably will sometime soon this year. They'll be hitting 1 million mark. But rounding off 1 million people, 2.5 metro, also 3 million by 2030. That's the 6 million that we see for Austin, San Antonio. I say that because as you think concentric circles, you think about your Jerusalem, your Judea, your Samaria. This is your world, right? We're getting the bullseye target. You think, what's this got to do with me? Well, we're the church. That's some stuff. We're going to get some more specifics. Austin was the fastest growing metro in the United States 12 consecutive years until last year. And they were the second fastest last year. Everybody in Austin will tell you they're the fastest growing city in the country last year, but they weren't. They're actually number 2 to Jacksonville, Florida. But here's the thing. They were number 1 for 12 years in a row. And it's based on percentage. If you know anything about compound interest and exponential growth, to think that you were number 1 year is a big deal. But you've got to keep a pace that's faster. It gets faster every year because you are outpacing yourself to stay number 1 for 12 consecutive years. That's how fast Austin's growing. If all you had to do is try to drive to Waco or to Belton or DFW and go through there, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? How many of y'all decide to go 281 because you don't want to deal with 35? Anybody here with me? Because that's what I do. I'm probably going back 281 today because I don't want to deal with Austin. I came down through Austin because my mom and dad live in Temple. So I stopped by and saw them there. I want to just real quick go through this. I want to get too detailed here on this. I don't know if y'all know about Loop 9 that they're now planned and they're going to build around Dallas-Fort Worth. None of it is in Dallas County. Only a sliver of it right here is in Tarrant County. Almost all of it is in the surrounding counties around it. It's going to go through Burleson, Waxahachie, Kaufman. It's going to go through Rockwall, McKinney, Denton, Aledo. If you know these towns, that's going to go through there. Why that's significant is once that ring is complete, just the ring itself, they're expecting it to add another 2 million people to DFW. Now that's DFW numbers if we want to look at DFW. The same thing's happened in Houston. They're way ahead of Dallas-Fort Worth. They've got Loop 99. Anybody been on Loop 99? Houston's just so big out there. I'm not sure this is exactly accurate, but that's what I tell people. Houston's so big now, it's the size of Maryland. I'm not sure that's 100% true, but the sprawl of Houston, when people say I'm in Houston, and they're talking about Rosenberg, and they're talking about maybe even Galveston, and they're talking about Conroe, the spread is just huge. This is the third loop. I don't know if you can see it from back there, but here's the inner loop. Here's the was called the outer loop, and now they have the outer loop. And it takes 2 hours driving all the way around Houston to go around Houston with that loop. Now you think, well, I live in a town. It takes 2 hours to get around the town. No, you're driving fast to go 2 hours. You're not just stuck in traffic. That's loop 9, and most of it is complete. Right now, if you want to go plant a church and you can be pried away from San Antonio, Daryl's going to throw something at me for saying that. Right up here, off of 59 and 99, is Roman Forest and Plum Grove, northeast of Spring and Conroe. They're building 40,000 homes. About half of them are going to be for those people who speak English, and about half of them are those who speak Spanish. And we need planners there. We need 10 yesterday. But we need them here in San Antonio. I'm going to talk about that also here in just a moment, and the surrounding area here as well. Real quick, I know I'm a fast talker. It's really weird to have a slow draw and a fast talker at the same time, but I know I do that. We're going to get 3 new interstates through Texas. And I'm talking about all this, it's almost just mind-boggling, the stuff I'm throwing at you. So we're going to get to the practical part in just a moment. Some of this you probably already know. If you've heard me say it, maybe you've seen it. The one that's going to split Texas right through the middle is I-14. There's already a section of it built between Temple and Killeen, by what's now called Fort Cavazos, used to be Fort Hood, Fort Cavazos. And it's going to go through, if you can see the towns, it's Jasper, Woodville, Livingston, Huntsville, Temple, Killeen, Brady, near Menard, and it lands in Fort Stockton. It's actually going to go all the way to Georgia, but the Texas leg is here. So we're going to have 10, 20, 14, well, 10, 14, 20, 30, and you all know this interstate system, why they're numbering the way they are. It's going to just add another layer east to west of Texas. We got another interstate in West Texas being built, and it's going to go from Laredo to Canada. But right now the plans are Laredo to Denver. It's going to be I-27. A small section of it already exists between Amarillo and Lubbock. But this interstate's going to be there, and here's why. Laredo is the largest inland port in the United States. It's Laredo. And more goods come over land through Laredo than any other city in the United States, including anything with Canada. So it's a major hub. Now, I don't know where we are with all the trading and stuff we're doing right now and how that affects that. That's been the case for years and years. So the terminus station is north to south of 27 is going to be Laredo. Laredo is also going to be part of the next one. I-69 is also going through East Texas. It's going to mirror Highway 59 for the most part. It's going from Texarkana through East Texas, go down to Houston, go down to Victoria, where it's going to branch out, and it's going to have a terminal station in Brownsville, one in McAllen, and another one in Laredo. Why am I sharing with you here in San Antonio about these 3 different interstate systems? What do the interstate system being rebuilt and built out in Texas have to do with Texas? Why is that important? More houses, more businesses, more traffic. Why are they building more infrastructure? You just have to answer that question to yourself. Because the population's doubling, right? You got more people coming here. In Austin, San Antonio, I know you're San Antonio, Austin's north here, but this area is in the thick of it. You're in the heart of it. And the people who are sick of it are then moving out to the hill country, or they're moving south, they're moving back east a little bit and getting out to the country, and all those areas are booming, right? Everywhere all around. From Seguin to Fredericksburg, everybody's growing. Everything west of Austin is as well. So that's just the highway system. I'm going to bore you just a little bit. Some of y'all are excited about this. Some of y'all aren't so much. This is one of the major industries that's changing things in Texas. It's been changing since 98 when the word fracking came up. My son's baseball team, we were the Drillers. That was the name of the baseball team. I didn't name them. I just inherited the team. Do y'all remember the Tulsa Drillers baseball team? I guess that's where the name came from. Well, the moms decided they didn't want to be the Drillers, so they let the dads and the boys decide to change the name, and we changed the name of the team from the Drillers to the Frackers. Now, I want y'all just to imagine 12-year-old boys with Frackers written in cursive across their jerseys. The moms were not happy at all. We became the Tomahawks, okay? One of the boys liked the coach's name was Tom, so we became the Tomahawks. Fracking changed everything. Texas now is the 4th largest oil producer in the world. And we're almost 3rd. Now I'll tell you who number 1, 2, and 3 are. Number 1 is Saudi Arabia. Number 2 is Russia. Number 3 is the rest of the United States. and Texas is virtually tied with them. We're neck and neck with the rest of the United States. That if we were our own country, we would be basically tied for third oil producer. And here's the big reason why. Something called fracking. I'm not going to get into the science of that. You can look that up if you want to, but it changed how we did oil in Texas. And there are 9 major fracking fields in the country. One of them just south of here. We've got the Permian Basin out west, the Eagle Ford. Y'all know about that. You live here in San Antonio. As you go through the list, I'm going to highlight in yellow how many of the 9 are in Texas. 5 of the 9 are in Texas. Texas oil business is so big now that it is its own country. Our oil industry is its own driver economically. And that is not going away anytime soon. That industry is not going to change. That'll be a big driver because oil is in so many products. I get it. We want to go to electric cars and all of that. Even if every car went to electric, oil is still going to be big business for a lot of reasons, right? And this is driving money. If any of y'all got young adults, I would say mostly men, but I guess girls can do it as well, and they want to go make money, they're just giving away money for free out in Midland. If you want to go out there, they can't get enough people hired. They're just hand over fist. You don't even have to have education if you want to go to Midland. Talk to me more about that if you want to talk about that. If you get in the oil business. 45% of the oil production in the United States comes from Texas. 45% of it does. And it'll be ranked 4th in the world. I mentioned those countries earlier. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the business things. I want to get to some of the more practical things, but I will say some about this and some about the other transportation. 140 major companies have moved their headquarters to Texas since the pandemic. And here's a few of them. Caterpillar, Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, Charles Schwab has a university up where I live. They live just north of Fort Worth. They built a massive complex. So is Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, T. Waterhouse. They all have massive complexes. There was a debate for just a minute. They were going to move the New York Stock Exchange from New York to Texas. And the 2 locations it was going to land was Fort Worth or Austin. But they built the stock exchange basically north of Fort Worth. Chevron moved their headquarters, Tesla. And did y'all see last week KFC announced it's moving its headquarters to Texas? They're not KFC anymore. Now they're TFC because they're in Texas. They've been in Louisville all this time. They're not going to change the name. They're still the KFC. They're the last one to do it. Quoted by the governor, this is 3 years old now. Every 6 days, another company from somewhere else relocates its headquarters to Texas. Why? Y'all tell me. Y'all are smart enough. Why are they moving to Texas? What? Tax incentives. We have a cost of living. It's not cold here. Except for those weird 1 week. We're in the middle of the country. There's a lot of factors. And yet, this is the business world. 63% of the executives say their business are understaffed. So if their businesses are understaffed, what do they need? They need more people to come to Texas to get jobs. Now, I say that, and you all know somebody that can't find a job. I don't know what to say about that. My son graduated from college last year. He's also looking for one as well. Real quick, these are the businesses that are going in Texas. I want you to think about what's happening in San Antonio. Construction, real estate, oil and gas, manufacturing, supply chain, that's a big one. Technology, healthcare, defense industry, that's the one here. All of these are, but finance and banking, and then we have leisure and entertainment. We used to have an NBA team in Dallas. I don't know if y'all used to hear about that. We had one. But we gave the heart and soul away about 3 weeks ago, so I'm not a fan anymore. But anyway, that's the sore point. Why I bring it up? I want to talk about supply chain because this is a major part of Texas. We know we're industry. We know we're oil and gas. And I don't know if y'all know or not, and I think most of us, we are banking. Texas is a worldwide player when it comes to finance and banking and investments. But supply chain, we are one of the leading places. You're like, I'm a preacher. What does this got to do with me? We're going to get there soon. Anybody been to Seattle? I know you have, because I took you with me. Anybody been to Seattle? This is pretty impressive if you've ever been there. This is right downtown. It's right off of downtown. And as you're downtown Seattle, you see the port of Seattle. And these are all the containers that are coming in, and I just got a glimpse of it. You can't see it all on the pictures that I have there. They're just constantly moving freight. And it's pretty impressive. You think, wow, that is incredible. And they do. They move a lot of freight from Seattle. Because it's in the northern part of the United States, but the way the Pacific Ocean is made, it's kind of a parabola, and it's a whole lot easier to cross from Korea and China and Japan and just skim the northern Pacific and you hit Seattle. It seems like a very logical place. To go south, you got to cross the Pacific at a very wide place in the globe. But having show you these pictures and talking about that, I want y'all to see the tonnage that is being brought into the United States at the ports. Seattle is down here, and they bring in this was about 4 years ago, 23 million tons of goods per year that port is able to produce. As impressive as it was, if you've seen it, you go back up the list, Houston does 285 million. More than 10 times what Seattle does. Significantly more than what Seattle does. It's coming through Houston. South Louisiana, our next door neighbor, is second. Look who's number 3, Corpus Christi. So it's not just Houston that's doing it. You got New Jersey, New Orleans, Long Beach, but I'm going to do the same thing and then put it in yellow. Look at all the Texas cities in yellow that are on the list. This is the highest ranked ports that are bringing goods to the United States. Houston, Corpus, Beaumont, Port Arthur. Freeport brings in more than Seattle does. Freeport, Texas, and Texas City. These are massive places there. Now, why in the world would a ship take twice as long to get to the United States? Instead of crossing the northern Pacific to go to Seattle, it's going to cross the Pacific Ocean diagonally, go all the way down the coast of Mexico, go down through Central America, across the Panama Canal, come back up through there into the Gulf of something, and the Gulf of Mexico. I still call it Guides. No, I still call it the annuity board. Anybody there with me? You call it, or Sundays? Come to the Gulf of Mexico, up to Houston. Why would you do that? And you go to Texas City instead of Seattle. What's the reasons for that? There's about 3. Land transportation is a big part of it, and we're in the center part of the country. What are you going to say? The ports, the cost, the taxes. Los Angeles, by the way, which is in the middle here. Where's Los Angeles? Yeah, Los Angeles is the biggest port in the United States, size-wise. It's the biggest port. They can handle more freight than anybody else. But why is Houston doing 4 times the work as Los Angeles? Again, it's on the West Coast. It'd be easier to get it there because of the cost of labor, because of the cost of taxes and the fees the states put on it. It's just a whole lot cheaper to drop it in Houston than it is Los Angeles or Seattle. And I'm not trying to be pro Texas, maybe a little bit, but the point of it is this is impacting our population. And then once they get it on rails in Houston, it goes to the rest of the country. Ideally, you would think get it to the West Coast and then put it on rails, but there's reasons why it doesn't happen that way. A little bit more. This is now talking specific populations growth the last decade. We will need to update this in the next few years. Hays County. Somebody tell me where Hays County is. Y'all know where it is. It's the one just north of us, right? Where we are right now. These are the fastest growing counties by percentage, not actual population, but by percentage. Hays, Como, Williamson. Where's Williamson? Where's Como? Don't know where that is, right? Como. I didn't say it right. Yeah. New Braunfels. Where's Williamson? You know where that is? That's Georgetown, Round Rock. Kaufman is the Dallas area. Fort Bend, you know where that is? Houston area. Rockwall, Dallas area. Denton, Montgomery County, y'all know where that is? That's outside of Houston. Collin County outside of Dallas. Chambers County outside of Houston. And so these are the fastest growing populations. Look, in 10 years, I want to tell y'all something, these counties grew by half. Y'all know that. Y'all live in this area. They grew by half. And they're outpacing that this decade. By population, Harris County, which is Houston, almost 1 million, 2/3 of 1 million people in 1 decade moved to the Houston County. That doesn't count all those other surrounding counties that we're talking about. Harris County itself. Tarrant, where I live, grew by 300,000. Let me see, did I add in that? No, I did not. My son was born before 2010, so we didn't add a person in there in that time. For all those people not from here, Bexar County is 294. I know. Bear County. That's right. Bear is, but you know, if you look at Tarrant, Bear, Collin, Travis, they're all right at the same, 300,000. Every piece of evidence suggests that this decade will outpace last decade. Now, let's just get down to Bear County. Let's say there's 300,000 people we added to the rolls last decade. Let's say we add another 300,000 this decade. Are our churches reflecting those numbers? Did our churches increase by 300,000 people? Did they increase by 30,000 people? Did our churches in the last decade increase by 3,000 people? Sound a little bit like the angels that were visiting Abraham talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Did our churches decrease as our population is skyrocketing? Yes, they did. All of our churches have declined. Here's a very sad, shocking statistic that happened in 2020. First time it ever happened in American history. Every single county in the United States reported a decrease in attendance in church. Now you think, well, it's because of COVID. No, they were reporting the 2019 numbers. Before COVID, every single county in the United States, all of them, reported a decrease in attendance in church. Y'all know that. Y'all see that every day, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to deal too much with this chart, although I want to point out a couple. This is the racial breakdown in Texas. We have 1970. I'll tell you why I picked that date. I'm a 1970 model. Any other 70 models here? That's when I was born. Welcome from the 70s, right? Texas population. These numbers are a little wonky because we're not sure exactly how everybody rated themselves, but in 1970, Texas was 86.8% white, 12.5% black, negligible Asian. Now, I don't know why, and maybe one of you can educate me. Sometimes Hispanics and Latinos are counted white, and sometimes they're not, and I don't know how the science of that is. But that was buried in those stats. But if you fast forward to 2020, 50% of Texans are white. African American black is 12%, about the same. Asian is at 5%, other races at 13%, and 2 or more races are at 17%. A lot of data here. I'm going to ignore most of it. I want to look at that bottom right there. 30% of Texans identify as other or multiple race. 30%. A third of Texans. Self-identified. Nobody else declared this for them. They self-identified as other than one of these or as actually more than one race. If the 30% of our population says that about themselves, I want you to think about your church. Does your church reflect 30% of your immediate population is multiracial? And most of our churches don't. That's the takeaway from that slide for me. In 2021, we became the majority Latino state. And that happened in 2021. 40.2% of Texas was Latino, 39.3% was non-white. Excuse me, non-Latino, non-Hispanic. So that is they're not the majority in the state, but they're the largest population is Hispanic, right? We're in San Antonio. I don't have to convince y'all of that, right? We hit 30 million in 22. Can y'all remember a few slides back how many people we now have in 2024? By the way, we hit 30 million in October of 22. And at the end of 24, 31.2 million. In less than 2 years, we added 1.2 million people to the state of Texas. It was actually about 16 months. We added over 1 million people in the state. So it's just, that's how fast things are moving. When people say we have 30 million people, no, we don't. We did. A couple of years ago, we passed that. We slungshot past that. Slungshot a word. I think I made that word up just now. We're estimating a population of 35 million in 2030. I already said that in the numbers that we look moving down the future. Now, here's when I'll start to get practical. Your heads are swimming. It's a lot of data. You can't remember all of it. We can record it and get it to you if you need to. But now I want to get real practical. As the population changes, as the business culture changes, we are now starting to hear some things about what is expected from the Texas that we have. This is what millennials and Gen Z expect from business. They're going to work for a business. It's about their employers or where they get their goods and services. The businesses in their community. Maybe they don't even work there. But if this big company is coming to my community, this is what I expect of it. They want a company with a clear mission or vision. They don't want a muddled up company that they work for. You probably do, right? They want a company that has a collaborative and innovative culture. I got this straight from data from I've gone blank on the magazine, but the Entrepreneur magazine. That's where I got this. They want a management team that is committed to the employees' success, not to necessarily the only success of the culture or the business. Now, they do want the success of the business because everybody's got a vested interest in it. But they want the people to succeed too. They want a flexible work schedule and more remote work opportunities. That one's taken a hit more recently. They want a healthy work-life balance. Have you heard this from people? Right? Have you said some of this stuff yourself? Right? Here's the run that's real controversial. They want an ESG conscious company. I'll explain what I mean by that. Maybe you're familiar with that. Maybe you're not. That does dip somewhat in the DEI world, and I know that's cuss words now these days in some circles, but it's not exactly that. And I'm not saying that what we should be for. I'm telling you what people are thinking. What ESG means, ESV is something else altogether. ESG is they want a company that is thinking about what they're doing to its environment, what they're doing to the society around them, and how they're governed. That's what those three mean. And what they're doing to the environment is, I don't want to be investing in a company that's tearing up the environment by the way they get their stuff, by the way they move their stuff, by the way they distribute and sell their stuff. I don't want a company that's just destroying the world around me. I am a Christian ecologist. I get that from my grandma. Because if my grandma ever saw me throw trash on the ground, she would have hit me in the back of the head. And I grew up in the day and age where grandmas could hit you in the back of the head. And not lightly, right? And so she said, that's God's creation. Don't tear it up. That's how she believed. And somehow as Christians, we don't seem to have that as much anyway. But what is the environment around us? What are we doing to the environment around us? It's important to that generation. How we work together as a social group and how we work within the corporation is important. And when it comes to governments, they want a government leadership team that is transparent, that is considerate, that here's what they don't want. What I mean by that, those last two, is they don't want 7 old men go make a decision behind closed doors and come tell everybody else that's the way it is. You just do what we tell you because we know what's good for you. That was the culture of the world for a long time. Now here's where I'm going to get myself in trouble. I know it's being recorded. I know some people get mad at me and yell at me and throw things at me. I think there's a word of caution to be said here. Somebody's going to stand up and run. Y'all get mad. I hear the harumph right now already getting ready to happen. I don't think I'm not against what I'm about to say. I just think you need, see, it's already happening. Anyway, I think you need to just think through. We have so many churches. I'm not against this. In fact, I think there's a reason to do it. We have so many churches that are moving away from congregational leadership to elder-led model. And sometimes it appears to be 3 to 7 old men at the back room that make all the decisions and tell you what you're supposed to like and do and accept. Now, I'm not saying I'm against elder-led model. I'm saying this, though, you've got to be transparent. You've got to communicate. You've got to collaborate. Because the people who like that model are between 35 and 55. The people who will not like that model are everybody under 35. They will not like it. But they don't know enough about it yet. But when the rubber meets the road and practicality kicks in, and one day they realize how things are done, they're going to leave the church. And they're not going to tell you about it. They're just going to be gone. You'll never know why. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. And that's part of that very thing. It's probably what generated your thought on that. And I think if I had one takeaway from this slide, the bottom one would be it. Relationship is currency. That goes back, nobody cares what you know until they know what you care. You've got to be in a way. A good pastor is far better than just a good preacher. And I think we've just kind of decided if you could preach good, you ought to go be a pastor. My twin brother that's having the eye surgery right as we speak, he's probably done by now. I don't know when it's going to be done. He's in Seattle, so they're 2 hours behind us. So they started it at 8 o'clock, but their time, so 10 o'clock our time. So I don't know if he's in it or not. I don't know how long it's going to take. He had a young man that was talking to him. He said, I want to plant a church. He's in Seattle. I want to plant a church. So tell me, what qualifies you to be a planter in Seattle? Fair question, right? He goes, well, I went to a seminary and I got a master's of theology. He said, okay, well, tell me else. He goes, and then I went and got another master's. I got a master of missiology. And so my brother goes, okay, that sounds great. Can I ask you one other question? He goes, well, yes. He goes, what qualifies you to be a pastor and a church planter in Seattle? He goes, well, I just told you I got a master of theology and a master of missiology. Those are very good and important, and I've got a master's myself. I love seminary. I love books. But you also need to relate to people. You have to have pastoral skills. And a whole bunch of church knowledge is wonderful. I'm glad I've got what I've got. You have to have that. If you don't have that, you have a deficiency. But that's not all you have to have. Relationship is currency. It's far greater. And that's always been true. But at this generation, it's as thick as it's ever been. Can I change that slide slightly? Because this is what they're expecting of the business world around them. Here's where I want to change it. Back in yellow. This is what they expect from churches. That was a long setup to get to that point. This is what they're going to expect from your church. If you want to minister, I'm talking about those under 35, and to some degree, even higher up age-wise. If we're trying to figure out why we don't have the 35-year-olds or the 25-year-olds in church, it could be the cool music down the way. We're hearing some out here, not picking up on the video. It could be that. Maybe we address that. It could be that they're tired of 9 guys or 5 people making all the decisions and tell everybody they just have to live with it. They're never going to tell you that. I mean, maybe some bold one will. I have a daughter who's pretty bold. She'll probably tell you, but most won't. They'll just smile and nod and drift away. So that is a key thing to understand and realize. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is, you're 100% right. We want those things. So as we think about how to lead church, that's going to be a part of the factor. Maybe not even the leading part, but it's a significant part of how we do business in church. I'm going to talk a little bit. We have a need for more healthy churches. I talked about 3 million more, almost 4 million more people coming to Texas. Do you know that half of Texans have no faith whatsoever today? 0% faith in their lives. Half of Texans. Am I in the good place? We need to move. All right. This came out last year, 2 years ago now, since we flipped the year, 2 years ago, that 52% of Texans identify as non-religious. None. Not part of any religion. 52%. The 48% that identify with being a person of faith includes Baptists and Catholics and Assemblies of God. And it includes Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Mormons. They're in the crowd that do consider themselves people of faith. All right, real quick math. If there's, and we're going to have another 4 million people. We're going to be roughly 20. If half our churches, real quick math, if there's 30 million people, 50% don't know God. Probably a whole lot more than that. We're going to have another 4 million. Rounding figures off, we're going to have 20 million unreached people in Texas by the end of this decade. 20 million people, minimum. It's probably higher than that because we're counting people in there who say they go to church, but they really don't, right? 20 million lost people in Texas, in our state, in the next 4.5 years, 5 years. And we're doing the same stuff, barely doing anything in the church work. This is what gets me excited and anxious, all wrapped up. Just to put that in perspective, there's 20 million lost people. That's where we're going to be in 4 years. It's larger than, you might know that country? I'm going to test you with your state flag. That's Austria. There's more lost people in Texas than the entire population of Austria. Or Cambodia. Or Zimbabwe. Or Bolivia. Sweden. I know your flags, right? I'm testing you. Greece, Switzerland, Portugal, Israel. More lost people in Texas than any of those countries' entire national populations. Do we need to send missionaries to those countries? Absolutely. Do we need people to go do work in California and Seattle and Chicago and Boston, New York? Absolutely. But folks, we have a mission field right here in Texas. There's a lot of those people that are coming to Texas, those 4 million people that are coming in the next 4 years, rounding off, are coming from California and New York and Boston, and they're coming from Cambodia, and they're coming from all over the world, right? I may have one more flag. I don't. If we revitalize and replant the churches we have now, and if we get behind as much as we can in church starting, and if somehow we have 5,300 churches in Texas Baptist, there's, I think, 2,800 in SBTC, and about 1,200 of those are dually aligned. So I think the total is somewhere, if you do all that math, it's 6,500 to 7,000 churches, something like that, both state conventions combined. But just on our side of things, if every church grew by 200, would you like your church to grow by 200 people in the next 4 years? That'd be amazing for most of our churches. If every single church grew by 200, not going to happen, but if they did, if somehow a revival took place and every church grew by 200, we'd reach 1 million people, which is 5% of the lostness and 95% still. If we did this miraculous thing and we had 200 people join every church, 95% of people still would be lost. I'm just trying to paint out a picture. We got some work to do. And we get so lackadaisical sometimes. 95% of the Texans that still would be unreached would still not be reached. If we just added 500 new churches, which is a pretty big task in the next 4 years, and each one of them grew by 200 people, that's just 100,000 more people. We need to start every church we can. Our partners need to start every church we can. The BGCT needs to start all the churches it can. The SBTC needs to start every church it can. We're not enemies. They can start all they can, and we can start all we can, and we still don't have enough. We need to work with our Presbyterian brothers. We need to work with others. We just got to do as much as we can to beat back the darkness. As long as we argue behind closed doors with each other, we're not expanding the kingdom of God. I'm getting on the topic here. I'm not going to spend any time on this. This is just the life cycle of churches. I'm not going to spend much time on this. I was going to, and I'm not going to for sake of time, other than every church has a life cycle. Now, this isn't written in stone. What you have to do is you have to learn how to catch it as it's on the decline. But every church, it fits somewhere in this. You have a launch. You have very fast, momentous growth. Then you become more strategic. It slows down a little bit. Then you get to a healthy plateau. It's sustained. That could last for years or even decades. Often it doesn't last as long as we think it does. We often think we were healthy a lot longer than we really were. We thought we were healthy for 30 years. If you really look at the underliers, we were probably healthy for 6 or 7 years. And it just kind of lagged beyond that and slowly declined. At some point, we would move into maintenance. This is how you know if your church is in maintenance. If you just got a bunch of committees to keep going everything that's already kind of doing there, not inventing anything new, not doing much, no growth. Then you get into preservation. Now we're hanging on for dear life with everything we can. People, money, buildings. And at some point we go on life support, or maybe something we could even call church hospice. That we have churches all across Texas that we're at that point. We've got to turn that around. I don't have time to get into that. I really shouldn't have put that up there without getting more time. As we start thinking about all these things, here's some of my favorite quotes. Mark Clifton says, the community does not exist for your church exists for the community. There was a church, Tom Revilla and I went to this church. I won't tell everything that happened at that church. We went somewhere in Central Texas. We'll leave it nameless, right? And I asked the guy, their church had declined and declined and declined. And I said, there was no staff. It was just a lay leader. I said, why do you think the decline has happened in your church? Well, everybody just likes beer. Wasn't quite the question I was asking. I could kind of see where he was trying to go there with it. It was a side question. What came out of that meeting was he just wanted everybody in the church, everybody in the community to like his church more. But that's not what you're here for. The community does not exist, and churches operated like that for most of our lives. That we'll build a church, and they're just going to come because we build a building, and we put on the show, and they're just going to like what we do. And that's not the case. Your church exists for the community, which means this. Is the church doing what it wants to do, and the community better like it or else? Or are you changing what you're doing based on what the community needs? It may be radically different. If your church looks radically different than your community, this might be something to consider. There's a lot of issues there. The church exists for, C.S. Lewis said it a little more eloquently than Mark Clifton. I don't know if y'all know who Mark Clifton is. I love Mark. He's a friend of mine. He's funny. He works with NAM, with revitalization. C.S. Lewis, we know him better, is a little more eloquent. The church exists for nothing else but to draw men to Christ and to make them little Christ. Now, we know what the word Christian means. What does the word Christian mean? Little Christ, right? I'm not your church. This is a class participation time. I want you to answer out loud again. Not your church. So you're not talking about your church. I'm just talking about some other church somewhere out there. Just one you can think about. Is that church in your mind, does it exist to lead others to make them little Christs? Or are they doing some other stuff? What are churches doing? This answer out loud. What are churches doing other than that? What? Just be a fashion church? They're not making disciples. It's about. All right. Some churches are very self-reflective. They're just feeding themselves. we're going to do what I want to do. And if you don't like it, what can you do? You can go away. And oftentimes those people aren't becoming little Christ themselves, right? What else are churches doing besides making little Christ? Making disciples is what that means. Mm-hmm. Yep. Just filling up a calendar. That's going to be exciting when we get to heaven and Jesus goes, what'd you do with your life? I filled up calendars. Didn't lead anybody to Jesus over a lifetime of ministry, but we did a lot of stuff. Jesus did not say, go and fill up calendars. He said, go and make disciples. I would challenge us on this. I challenge myself. I'm talking to myself. I'm preaching to myself right here, and y'all can just overhear it. Jesus did not say, go make converts. He said, go make disciples. And our churches don't make disciples. We're just happy if they get saved and get baptized. And oftentimes then they don't ever look any different 10 years later than the day they were saved. Same old stuff. I don't know what to do about that. All right, I'm preaching. I didn't mean to preach. I apologize. All right. If y'all know who Reggie McNeil is, he came out of Texas Baptist Life. He now is in Florida. I actually heard him say this myself. I thought it was so good I wrote it down. I was at a church that was celebrating its 40th anniversary that he started in Mount Pleasant. What we do on Sunday morning is halftime. No one gets excited about a football team that loses, but had a coach give a great halftime speech or had great music in the locker room. Halftime is for rest and healing for the second half and to develop strategy or prepare yourselves physically and emotionally and spiritually to go win the game. And we get real excited about halftime in the church. We're not making a difference in the world now. Now, that's a little pejorative. It's a little critical, overly critical, not 100% fair. Because what we do on Sunday morning is important, and I don't want to minimize what we do on Sunday morning. But if your church is defined by two things only, it's not meeting the needs of the community. Here are the two things. If our church are primarily defined by two things, by its location and the schedule between 8 and 12 on Sunday. If that's the two things churches are mostly defined by, they're not engaging their community in a way they need to be engaging their community. We have to be outside of our walls, off of our property, and outside of the Sunday morning time schedule to be an effective church today. That was effective 30 years ago. And here's where we all kind of get off the hook. Here's fairness to everybody here. That's not what we were taught in seminary. That's not what we were taught as preacher boys. Not me. I wasn't taught that. Go put together, a good worship team. Go learn how to preach. Go do the best you can, and it'll kind of take care of itself. That did work 30 years ago. But with the world changing around us, the game plan has changed. I don't have time for this. Boy, I love it, but I'm going to go through it quickly. We live in a VUCA world. I'm going to tell you where I got this. Y'all might know this gentleman. You might know Gary Patterson. Of course, y'all all do know Gary Patterson. This is Gary Patterson. I don't know where he is today. He came in. He said, Tom stole my stuff. That's just from Gary Patterson right here. Okay? We live in a VUCA world. How many of y'all have heard Gary talk about a VUCA world? Surely, okay. 3 or 4 of y'all have. A VUCA world, and I got the little jacked up there. Sorry that it's on top of each other. This is a military term, by the way, not a Baptist term. This is from the U.S. military. Y'all, if you know Gary Patterson, you know that's a military term, right? We live in a world that's full of volatility. It's uncertain. It's complex. And it's ambiguous. And I'm not going into a lot of details about that. But basically, it means we live in a world that's really hard to define, and everything seems to be changing all the time. Is that fair to just wrap it up that way? Is that a fair way of saying it? Yeah. World's changing. I'm going to drop down this last part of this slide. We used to have a simple world that became a complicated world that has now become a complex world. The simple world is this. If I want carrots and eggs, I have a garden and chickens in my house. That was a simple world. And most of the world lived in a simple world until the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution hit the United States and England in the 1700s, other parts of the world later. Some parts of the world still hasn't hit the Industrial Revolution yet. And it's a simple world. If I want bananas, I got a banana tree. If I want mangoes, I got a mango tree, right? That's just a simple world. But with the Industrial Revolution came the complicated world. How about you grow carrots and you raise chickens, and I'll cut down trees and make lumber, and as a small society together, we'll all kind of do our part. I'll do a little bit, and we'll kind of trade amongst ourselves. And that was the world we lived in all of our lives. All of us here have lived in a complicated world all of our lives until 2011, when these suckers came out. And that's kind of the line as we're going to look back in history when the world changed, was 2011. Not just because of cell phones, because of a lot of other factors. We've now moved into a complex world. I don't want to get too lost on that. If you're interested in it, I would write down and Google these concepts because you really can spend all day thinking about it. But this becomes significant, and I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. I'm not going to try to go too long. A complicated world, this is key, especially what we learned in seminary and college. It's very important to understand these distinctions. A complicated world requires more expertise, higher efficient programs. That's what we learned, right? You learn more, become an expert, get these programs down, you implement that, everything will take care of itself. That was but a complex world requires adaptive leadership. There are no more experts because the world's changing too fast. We're going to have to, that's why I looked at the data today. By the way, I do hear people quote data, and I know they're wrong because I know what the data is all over Texas, the United States. And I'll say, hey, where'd you get that? And they'll show me a University of Houston study from 2014. If you're looking anything population from Texas prior to 2020, it's obsolete. It doesn't work anymore. And really, 2020 now is becoming too far back. You've just got to be as accurate. So what it means by this, in a complex world, in this world that we live in today, everything is interconnected. There's never just one or two outcomes, but almost incalculable possibilities. Most churches, here's the key why I'm saying this phrase, this slide, most churches and most organizations still today are operating in a complicated world. And if we just get the right preacher to come in and preach the right sermons, we develop this new program at the church, it'll all take care of itself. And it won't work in the world that we live in anymore. There's elements of it that does, but we live in a complex world that we're going to constantly have to be adaptive. And it's hard. It puts extra wrinkles in our brains. But this is the world we live in. We can make it happen. We can operate. I didn't expect us to go there. So real quick on this one, this is the 20-hour lesson here. I've shared this one here before. A couple of these I have. Maybe you remember it. This one I have before. I've led about 5 churches through this slide. The long version, this is a 7-hour conversation. This one is a 7-hour conversation, and this is a 7-hour conversation. It's about 20 hours to go through these. I'm going to give it to you in about 4 minutes. So unless you want the 20-hour version, I don't know. We may have a couple meals here there. The first thing I would start with is on the right side is what is your community profile? What does your community look like? What's the demographic studies? And if you have stuff that's more than 3 years old, it's too old. If you have stuff prior to COVID, it's too old. If you haven't done a demographic, if you're really interested in reaching your community, you need to do a demographic study today. And we can do that for you for free. I'm sure the association has access to that stuff as well. Probably other places you can get it. To understand your community the best you can, you need to know what your community's like because it's changing. In fact, I would argue the demographic report you're going to get isn't even up to date because they can't churn it out fast enough because their data is usually lagging 18 to 24 months. Some of them are a little better than that, but usually it's about 18 months. So that means that subdivision they just built over there, they built it in the last year and they added 91 homes. That's not in the demographic report. That's how fast Texas is growing. We're growing faster than the demographics can keep up with. But you need to look at the history of your community, the pluses and minuses, all those sorts of things. I would build out a profile. We actually had a worksheet. I mean, it was a whole thing. We worked with our church. This is what your community looks like. But you can do it in your head just with just a kind of an estimate of what your community looks like. Think about it racially, language. Think about socioeconomic. Think about is there a bunch of new stuff there? And then think about your church profile. Do the demographic study of your church. Think about your ministries. Now here's where it becomes important. There's a gap between these two. It's a community gap. I would call it an aspirational gap. There's a gap between, and maybe not, but I would dare say, raise your hand if you think this applies. My community doesn't look 100% like my church. Or maybe you should say it the other way. My church doesn't look like 100% like my community. Is that a fair statement? Who would say that about your church and your community, right? So, it could be racial, it could be language, it could be age. We're in a fairly young community, but our church is all old people. There's a lot of factors it could be. So, there's a gap there. If you're going to be the pastor of your community, the shepherd of your community, you need to figure out how to bridge that gap. And that's what this does here. Every church should have a strategic plan how you're going to reach your community. And by your community, I mean this. Very specific geographical area. Your church, there are exceptions, but they're very rare. If you're in the city, 1 mile radius. What are you doing to reach a 1 mile radius in the city? 2 mile max. Max. Most people are not going to go to church more than 2 miles away for the first time if nobody that they know. Now, the exception to those are if this whole family's going and they're inviting their cousin who lives 9 miles away, they might come and be part of it. Those are going to be exceptions. And when churches say, well, I've got people in my church that are coming, they're driving 12 miles, they drive 20 minutes to get here. Those churches aren't thriving and growing in leaps and bounds. Those churches are having add-on here and there because you can't sustain, it's not sustainable to have significant, healthy, strategic growth and be reaching people 20 minutes away. It has to be local. So I would say if you're in an urban setting, a city setting, 1, maybe 2 miles. 2 miles is, I would say, my max. If you're in a suburban setting or in a place where they're building a lot of homes, everybody's not tight together, you're looking at a 5-mile radius. And if you're out in the rural areas, small town, you got about a 15 to 20 mile radius. Anybody beyond that is gravy. But you've got to reach that 5-mile radius, is most of our churches, is a 5-mile radius. And if you look and see, most of the people in most of our churches are driving more than 5 miles to go to church. Most of you probably are. Because we're comfortable, we're familiar, we have relationships, we got connections. But when you drive more than 5 miles to go to church, you're driving past 12 other churches to get to your church, right? How are you going to invite your neighbor to your church? If you live more than 5 miles from your church, how are you going to invite your neighbor to your church? You have a heart for it. You love it. You're going there for a reason. But you invite them and they go, well, why are you going way over there to go to church? Don't we have a whole bunch right over here? And it's even more. It's in a small town. I mean, in the city. All right, I'm going to skip that one. Yeah, I'm going to do 2 more slides and I'm going to wrap up because I see the heavy eyelids. I got so much stuff I want to cover here. There are 2 types of strategy. Do we have a marker? I don't know if I see one up here. There's 2 types of strategy that I want to talk about that every church ought to have, every organization ought to have. Deliberate strategy, and emergent strategy. And what I mean by that is, and first of all, we have to have strategies. A lot of our churches don't have any strategy at all. The strategy is, I'm just going to preach sometimes. But the strategy means I have to think through what it's going to take to get people to my church. And do it in an authentic way. And we're not doing it just to have numbers. We're doing it because we're reaching souls for the kingdom of God. If we don't have strategy, we're not going to have, people aren't going to accidentally show up at church. Here's a statement I came across that was a slap in the face for me. You're going to see if it works or you just handed it to me. Your church, this is every church out there, your church is perfectly calibrated to be getting the results it's getting right now. Every church was set up to be where it is right now. What you've been doing the last 20 years, the last 5 years, the leadership development you've put in place, the people that are there, the issues you fought over, the things you've implemented, the ministries you've started, the ministries that you let die, all of that feeds into you are perfectly calibrated. You know what I mean by calibrated? You got to calibrate your car for the results you've got right now. So if we want better results, we have to recalibrate. And we do that through our strategy. And the 2 types of strategy, I'm going to draw it over here. This is my favorite thing to draw. On one side, we got deliberate strategy. That means we voted on it. We had a long-range planning team. We had people think through it. This is deliberate over here. And it says, okay, this is what we decided to do. We're committed to it. And that's the people who along the way come along and say, we're never going to change our minds. If Jesus comes down from heaven and say, hey, I want y'all to do this. No, Jesus, we voted on it, and this is what we're going to do over here. Anybody thought that and done that yourself? I'm not going to talk about other people. We're talking about ourselves. Y'all done that? This is what we're going to do. There are reasons to do that. That's where you start. You have to have an identity and a plan to start with. That's just good business. But the extreme that you run into, the risk that you run is, I'm not going to change for nobody no matter what. And we live in a volatile world that I said you have to have adaptive leadership. You have to change. Well, there's certain things I don't want to change. You're 100% right. We're going to talk about that. The other side of it is emergent strategy. And it looks something like this on the extreme. We decide we're going to do this. But then we read a book and we're going to do this. And we go to a conference that Tom talks about and we're going to change our mind. And then we're going to do this over here. And then the preacher had an idea, or this other pastor, this other church did this thing. And this is sort of what the strategy of the church looks like. James describes this wishy-washy. Y'all been in that church? Got a whole new way of doing things every time you turn around. That's not good either. These are the extremes. How do you mesh that as we look at how, so the deliberate is based on what is known, assumed, anticipated. It's unchanging, consistent, most likely can be divided and marked in sequential phases that we'd made a decision, we're going to do this. This is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3. We got all the noise around us, all the problems, we're committed to it. This is what we're going to do no matter what. There's a lot of strength in that. There can be some weaknesses too. Emergent strategy is based on what is unknown, unanticipated. It's constantly being modified or adjusted. It may not have sequential phases. It's just what happens comes affects who we are. Here's one that did. Can y'all imagine if you got up at your church on February 1st, I don't know what Sunday it was, but the first Sunday in February, in 2020, and you go, hey, whole church, I love you all. I've got an idea of what we're going to do for the next 6 months. We're going to shut down church. We're not going to have anybody in the building. We're going to start doing something. I've been investigating. I found something called Zoom, or a few of you Microsoft Teams. And we're going to do church on the internet. And everybody gets to stay in your pajamas at home on Sunday morning. How many of y'all would have had a job the second week in February in 2020? How many of y'all were doing that by the first week in April? Because emergent strategy made us do it. We didn't have an option. There are things that affect us that make us change. But we can't live that way. We can't live in the wishy-washiness of it all. So what's the balance between those? And I would encourage your churches to think this way. And I would encourage your church's leadership to really consider this concept on the differences of deliberate and emergent strategy. You can find this stuff online too. The best writer that I know of, if you really want to read it, is a guy named Clay. I don't know if I'm spelling his name right. Christensen. I don't know if there's an H in it or not. Clayton Christensen. He was the head of Harvard Business School for 29 years. He died of cancer 2 years ago also, or 3 years ago now. He wrote the number one business book that was the number one business book for a decade. The innovation of the disruption of innovation. He wrote that book and became, if I can say it right. So this is the pastor that's wearing everybody out. And the worst part of this is when the pastor comes and tells the church people, well, God told me we're going to do this now. And 18 months later, now God told me we're going to do this. And 18 months later, well, God told me to do this. And eventually, you can get away with a massive change that God told me to. You get away with it a couple of times. But at some point, your people are going to go, I don't think God's telling you anything. I think you're just doing what you want to do. And you're saying God told you. So let's find the common ground of how we can lead as we begin to think about how to lead adaptively. You have to start with deliberative strategy. Some of y'all thought I was going to diss on that, and I might a little bit, but you have to start with that. You have to have a plan. You have to think through things. You have to get leadership together and make decisions of what you're going to do. But something along the way is going to happen that's going to cause you to have to rethink your plans. Now, you don't change your values. You don't change your ultimate end goals. You don't change who you are. We're committed to the cause of Christ, of course, right? Those things don't change. But things happen that's going to cause us to take into consideration our journey kind of looks this. We're still going the same direction. We're not crazy over here, but we're allowing, with our committed deliberative plans that we're committed to and who we are and what we're doing, but as life happens, we're ebbing and flowing and we're flexing with what happens. All organizations have to do that. Some of you are here not even leading churches. Your organizations have to do this. And at these points along the way, you see these little bends at time. You don't really see one clearly there. This is the word we all picked up in 2020, right? These are pivot points. These are the moments that our church or our organization had to make some significant changes. And it happens about once every 18 months that we have to make a significant change on average. That's not an exact timeline. But about every 18, every 24 months, a significant change has. I want to ask you personally, in the last 18 to 24 months, here are the things that affect us personally, individually, in that time frame. Have any of you had a family member that you added to your family? Somebody got married, somebody was born. Right here, for show of hands, how many of y'all had that happen in the last 24 months? The majority of the room. Have any of you lost a family member in the last 24 months? Right? About half the room. And if I said, I had you ready, it would have almost got everybody if we did that. All right. How about a major move? Did you or immediate family member move, have a significant job change churches, have a health crisis, Brother's having surgery. I had 6 eye surgeries last year. I told you already. Did you have a financial issue that came up? Did you go back in debt because of something? Did you have a kid graduate high school? Did you have somebody graduate from college? Did you, I think I said already, did you have somebody get married? All of those factors affects you personally, right? Or you have a crisis at home, whatever it might be. Now I want you to think about your church or your organization. In the last 18 or 24 months, you probably had a significant event happen in your church's or your organization's history. And it could be something like this. A change of a major leader in the church, a staff position or organization. You had somebody leave or somebody came on. You had a change or you had an addition or a subtraction, right? You had a controversy, a big controversy. That could possibly be that change. You had the death of a key donor. Anybody had that one happen? That changes things. Sometimes really changes things. I know of a church that 80% of their receipts are given by 4 people in Fort Worth. And they're all over 85 years old. 80% of their budget is given by 4 85-year-olds or older. One is 91 years old. What's the 10-year plan for that church? What's the 3-year plan for that church? Right? Any one of those givers goes, it's a significant financial hit. Doesn't mean they shut down what they're doing, but you better take it into consideration, right? So as you think of, you had a church fight, you had a building that you developed, you started a new ministry, all of those along the way are affecting who you are. And at the end of the day, at the end of this 10-year, 12-year window, you're still trying to do exactly what you did 10 years ago with different people, different community, different events. You're not going to be effective. Craig Christensen says this, and he's talking about churches. He says nonprofits. He was a Mormon, he's a person of faith. We wouldn't theologically agree with him, and we take issue with Mormonism. But he was a person of faith, and he specifically addressed nonprofits. And I think he was talking the church world. He said this: if you haven't significantly changed the strategy of how you're reaching your constituency, how you're reaching your community, you haven't changed it in the last 7 years, you are 2 generations behind your community. If you haven't significantly changed, because our culture is changing every 3 years. If you haven't changed what you're doing in 40 years, you could possibly be 10 generations behind your community, your immediate context. And this is why when you're sitting at church and you look at Miss Gladys and she goes, well, it just feels like the whole world's changed around us. You know why it feels like the whole world has changed around you? Because it has changed around you. And it's, again, going back to Mark Clifton, it's not the church, it's not the community's job to catch up to us as the church. It's our job as the church to catch up to the community, not sacrificing the truths of Scripture, not sacrificing to modern day cultural issues. I'm not saying that. Apart from those things, though, we got to be interested not in propping up the institutions that we are part of. We have to be interested in reaching the community around us. The last thing I'll say on this slide is right here. I think this is very important. Anything unanticipated, if you're undeliberate, is seen as an obstacle. Not always a bad thing, but it's seen as an obstacle. Man, how are we going to deal with that? You know, we put all our stock in this staff member and he's moved to Georgia. Now what are we going to do? Or whatever may happen. On the other side, emergent person, anything that's unanticipated is seen as, hey, we got a new opportunity. Look at all the new people that moved here. Look at this event that happened. Let's go do something different with this. Some of you are geared one way or the other. I'm going to be really honest. I'm kind of leaning on this side. I'm like, oh, something else I got to deal with. I hope we're all entrepreneur and optimistic, but I think my default pattern is I'm just like, man, it'd be easier if everything just stayed the same. That's most of us. But some of you got some entrepreneur, some optimism. You're excited about change, and you see things that there's a new opportunity for us to do things. The last slide I'm going to look at is adaptive leadership, because I said this a long time ago. But I will take questions. If you have questions, begin thinking about them, write them down, put them on your phones. I'll be glad to answer as much as we can. If I said earlier, it's not about being the expert, but it's being about adaptive, that means several things. And one of the key things is this. And again, I'm not selling books. I'm not saying Clayton Christensen's books. I'm not selling Canoeing the Mountains. I reference it every time. I probably should just bring them in my bag and give them away. If you're not familiar with that book, it would be my #1 book to read, to buy and read, besides the Bible. All right? Do you have a copy of it? I'm just going to put it up here and I'll step back over there. It's written by Todd. I pronounce his name, if I can spell it right, I pronounce it Bolsinger. I've heard Bolsinger. At this point, I'm just, whatever you call him is what you call him. So And his mama couldn't spell Todd right, so he only has one D. I don't know how that happened, but I guess Tom only has one M, not two M's. This is a book about adaptive leadership. It came out in late 2018, but it really didn't take off until 2019, right in time for COVID. Really, fall of 2019 is when it became popular. And it's about thinking strategically as you have to constantly adapt. And what I like about it is, and you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and you don't have to be overwhelmed by all of this stuff as we think about it. I'm going to break it down pretty quick with this triangle. There's a triangle that if you want to draw it, that's fine. If you want to have adaptive leadership, that means you move into the future with your people and they follow you. They're going to adapt with you as an organization, as a leader. It means this: you trust me where I'm going to go. I've had pastors tell me, go to a new church, they'll call me I had one pastor, he called me, he decided he was going to change the name of the church and the governance of the church. See how quick he did. He called me. He started the second week of December. And he calls me the next week. Y'all know what time it is of the year. December, like the 17th, he starts, and he calls me next week. Hey, I think I want to change the bylaws and constitution and church governance by the end of the year. I said, the end of what year? He said, this year. I said, dude, it's Christmas time. You're new. You got one thing to do at church, right? One thing. Go sing carols with your people, right? Eat a candy cane. That's all you've got to do at Christmas to be a good pastor, right? It's not hard to be a good pastor if you're the new guy at Christmas. Unless you just don't know what you're doing. I'm like, please don't bring that up. You don't have to worry about that right now. Well, they don't have this, they don't have that. I said, that might be true. I don't know about all that. Just put it off. I mean, at least a year. I don't know what I'd deal with it at all. I'd just put it on the back burner. He called me on January the 6th and go, well, I did what you said. I waited till this year to bring it up. I said, well, how did that go? He said, well, they're not real happy with it. Well, duh, that's right. Because they don't know you. He said, but I'm smart. He was like, well, I know this, and I got this degree, and I've done that. I said, they don't know you. No matter how smart you are, they don't know you. They're not going to go with you, right? So I know what it is. I had this in Microsoft Word, and I had to adapt to Google Slides, and so it's messed it up a little bit. I'm sorry for that. I'll fix that next time. The first leg of the trust triangle, the adaptive ability that you have with people in their lives, there'll be people that'll go with you no matter what. If you can get this down as a leader in a church, the first leg to stand on is your knowledge base. That's going to be, let's see if it looks okay. That's going to be your skill set. Are you competent? Can you preach if you're at a church? If you're not at a church, it's going to be, can you lead an organization? What's your admin look like? What's your organizational skills look like? Are you competent? Are you in a business meeting and you seem to make sense? Or are you just talking foolishness when it comes to the finances? This guy don't know nothing about budget. But that's going to be the first thing. How smart is this guy? How skilled is he? Is he trained? If he can do that. That's the first impression you're going to get. By the way, as preachers, your first impression, anybody, is can you preach? That's the first thing you're judged on. Not how good you run a mission trip. They don't even know about that. They're going to judge you on your preaching ability. And I would think all of us can improve in that area. I'm going to chase a rabbit for that real quick. I read a book. I've been preaching, I think, all my life. My dad was my pastor growing up, and I became a pastor at 20. So I've been preaching a long time. And, I like to think I know what I'm doing. I don't. But I like to think, we all get there, right? I'm like, I know what I'm doing, right? I read a book, and I'm like, well, crud. Now I got to go back and rethink what I'm doing. And the book that I read was Preaching That Moves People by Yancey Arrington. Man, I'm ever giving y'all a library. I didn't mean to do that. Chapter 2, I come across this statement in chapter 2. He says, the problem isn't that we don't prepare good sermons. He says, we've taught people how to prepare good sermons. Seminary did a really good job of that. Problem is, we have a lot of 5-star sermons in the pastor's office that turn into 3-star sermons in the pulpit. I thought, are you talking about me? Because it's not about your knowledge base only. It is important. Yancey Arrington is that pastor's name. And the book is, he's a pastor, a very good preacher, by the way, in Houston area. Preaching That Moves People. And what he really convicted me on is one of the things he says in there, sometimes your good preaching is determined by the good stuff you edited out that you left on the floor that you never said in the pulpit. If you think you got to get everything that you thought about for that sermon to make it a good sermon, you may not be editing enough. You might be trying to get too much in. That's me. Guilty, guilty, guilty. I'm 100% guilty of that. All right, chase the rabbit on. Knowledge base is what you are judged on. When people first meet you, when you go to an organization, when you go to a church, that's 100% what it's based on. But the second thing, and the more important thing that comes, is your relationship. That's what you were saying earlier. Is your skill set in your relationships and how you build on it. Do you love the people? Are you emotionally intelligent? If you're not familiar with that, I'd get as familiar with emotional intelligence as you can. Sometimes it's called EI, and sometimes it's called EQ, whichever way it might be. And then these are Daniel and Lee are with me. They're going to get tired of me using these words. Proximity and frequency. Those aren't the best ways to say that, but I say those words because it just sticks in my mind. Proximity means how near to your people are you? I know a pastor that told me he never eats with his church members ever in an entire year. Not one meal. Not at church. They don't have meals at church. And his church is dying on the vine. I don't know what to say to that. How do you not eat with people? You got to be near your people, right? I tell everybody in Texas, where should most pastors be? Now, if you've been a pastor a long time, you could probably be outside of this one. But where should most pastors be in Texas in the fall on Friday nights? Where should they be? Y'all tell me. There's not a debate. I really don't like football. I don't care if you don't like football. Go out there for the band. You have to watch the football game. You're out there for the parents. You're out there for the families, right? I just find all times struggling pastors, and I'll say, they're like, oh, we don't know what to do to turn our church around. I said, well, do you go to the high school basketball games? Now, here's the thing about basketball games in Texas. It's weird. Everybody loves football. Most places love football. Not every place. And basketball is a hit or miss thing. Some towns don't care anything about basketball. Do you find that one town that basketball is the most important? And sometimes it's girls' basketball. It's more important than the boys' basketball. In some towns, just wherever it is, it's just the way it works. But you got to go be with your people. Look, if it's not sports, it's something, right? After a year, about a year, after you've gone through the calendar and you can prove you can do something for Christmas and Easter and summer, after you lock all that down, he knows what he's doing when it comes to Vacation Bible School. After a year, your knowledge and skills base is 15% of your ability to lead adaptively. It's only 15%. Now they know you can preach. Now they know you can do a budget. Now they know that you can get them to talk in public. Your relational ability is 85% of your ability to lead. And I think that's a weakness today in ministry, is we have a lot of people that think they know a lot about stuff trying to lead. And if you just, I'm really smart and I really know what I'm doing, and if you'll just trust me, I don't know you. You didn't come see my mama before she died, right? You never visited my grandmother. She was homebound for 11 years and no pastor ever saw her. You know what I'm talking about? Well, that's just not my skill set. My skill set is to be preparing sermons all week in the office. I prepare long sermons. I preach long sermons. Hey, I can talk about a doorknob for 30 minutes, right? I can do that. But you got to be in your people's lives. We have to do that. And that's the beginning of the adaptive leadership. The frequency part is you got to be near people and you got to be near them often, as much as possible. You can't say, well, I saw them once last year and I checked that off the box. Just go spend time. And I know, Pastor, by the way, y'all may not believe me. You're going to call me a liar when I say this. I'm actually introverted. I'm a twin, and he's the extroverted one, and I was the introverted one. And that was the reason, that was a hang up for me to even go into ministry. That, God, I don't want to talk to people. But you just do it. And once you do it, you get better at it, and it becomes more normal. Now, what it does for him is, after he's been in a crowd of people like this, his adrenaline's through the roof. He's excited. He's ready to go knock down a wall. And I'm worn out. I'm exhausted. I got to go lay down for an hour. Now, how many of you is the first one? Once you've been in the preaching and leading a ministry, after that, you're ready to go knock over a football player. Who here is that described? Any of you? You there, right? Now, how many of y'all are worn out, and afterwards you just got to curl up on the couch and just close your eyes for an hour? Any of y'all fit that description? That probably tells you if you're introvert or extrovert. You can be a little bit of both, because none of us are perfect on the end of that. But here's the reality is, we don't get the excuse, well, I'm not a people person. Not in ministry. If you're not a people person, you don't belong in ministry. That's just the way it is. Y'all don't need to know that. Like, I came all there for that. You're not smart enough, and you don't preach good enough to pastor without knowing people. Nobody is. I wish I could just say to everybody, all new pastors, your sermons will never, ever be good enough to outweigh being in the lives of your people. They'll put up with a bad preaching longer than they'll put up with bad pastoral skill set. There's a dotted line here, and what I mean by that dotted line is that's the point that people will follow you as a church. If you've been in a church for a period of time, there should be a certain amount of time, they'll follow you wherever. And I remember the moment that it happened. I went away. I took a 2-week vacation. I go 100 miles an hour at all times. And so I just learned to take a 2-week vacation. I did a 2-week vacation because it took me a week to calm down, because the whole first week of the vacation, all I'm thinking about is work stuff. Some of y'all there with me, right? So the second week, I actually have a vacation. I come back, and there's a new ministry at my church. I've been the pastor for 7 years at that church. They have a whole new ministry that's been started. And we'd not voted on it. We didn't talk about it. It was a great ministry idea. I had the idea, but I didn't know anybody else wanted to do it. And I thought, well, that's kind of neat. I was thinking about that. Now they're doing it. So I went to Mary Randolph, our secretary, and I said, hey, Mary, I see they're doing this ministry. What's that? She goes, oh, the church knew you wanted to do that. I said, we never talked about that. I didn't announce that. We didn't have a committee. We didn't talk about the deacons. You've been a pastor a long time. You know what I'm talking about. We had enough ebb and flow with me and the congregation. They knew me and I knew them. They knew this was important to me. And they decided to just pull the trigger. And they trusted me and I trusted them, and it worked. But it also sobered me up a little bit. I thought, I better be real careful what I say around people, because they're going to start doing stuff that I think about. It's a sweet place to be in ministry, and you don't get there in the first 3 years. You probably don't get there in the first 6 years. It's a sweet place in ministry. You got to get through a lot of heartache to get there. And so when people go into church, they immediately demand their rights, and this is my role, and I'm going to lead, and we're going to do this, and nobody follows. If you do this right, they will follow. If they have a servant's heart. That dotted line is that moment that they'll trust you. And it typically is 18 to 60 months in people's lives. It takes that long. 18 to 60 months for you to be in somebody's life, for them to be able to just trust you carte blanche. You say we'll do it, we'll do it. I'm not sure it's a good idea, but if that pastor wants to do it, I'm going to do it because I believe in him. That's how long it normally takes. Now, why such a long range? Because you're also dealing with their past hurts. And they've had 2 pastors before you hurt them. And you're paying for the sins of the previous pastor. And it's not about you. You could be the most wonderful person in the world. You could be caring, you could be loving, you could be intelligent. But the pastor before them was too, and hurt them badly. And this is my equation, how to equate that is. I want you to imagine a young lady, she falls in love with the love of her life. They fall in love in the 7th grade. They start dating. They get married in their early 20s. They love each other, and she finds out he's been cheating on her the whole time. She divorces him. She finds another guy. He's wonderful, and she loves him. And 2 years in, she finds out he's cheating on her. He's been cheating on her too. She finds the 3rd boy that she's going to date. Where's her trust factor of the 3rd guy? She just met him. It has nothing to do with him, right? It has everything to do with her. With her because of the experience she's had with the previous 2 boyfriends or husbands. And her trust factor is super, super high. You need to understand your church people, whether they've been part of your church or other churches, their trust factor may be very high and has nothing to do with you. It's just going to take that long. They've been hurt, wounded. By the way, it goes the other way too. Some of us as pastors have been wounded so bad by churches. Our trust of the church isn't very high either. Just be aware of that. And just know people are people, right? I will show this illustration. I'm close to being done. I'll share this illustration. So I went to Birdville Baptist Church. That was where I was pastor for 13 years in Fort Worth area, in Haltom City, if you know that area. If not, Fort Worth works. And Dave and Janice Davis were the couple that they flew to Alabama to hear me preach at the church where I was in Alabama. They were the one that they met me. We went to eat afterwards, and I got to visit with them. They were on the search committee that brought me to Texas, to Fort Worth. And when they did, they welcomed us to their house. They had a swimming pool. Our kids got to swim in their swimming pool. They were the people that were on our emergency list when our kids needed to be picked up to school and mom and dad couldn't get it. We had about 3 couples. Dave and Janice was part of those couples. And Janice Davis would be the one that would come and pick them up. Y'all pick up what I'm saying? Close relationship with his family. 6 years into being their pastor, Janice comes up to me one Wednesday night and grabs me by the elbow. Hey, Tom. I said, yes. She goes, I invited my friend Iris to church on Sunday. How do you respond to that, church people? Okay, well, good. But I'll look her up, bring her by, I'll say hi. How else would you respond? It's like, okay, well, good. Hey, I'd love to meet her. I turn around, she's still holding on to my elbow, like with the death grip. And she pulls me. You didn't hear me. I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on? She goes, I said I invited my friend Iris to church on Sunday. Okay, I'm just country dumb. You got to talk to me sometime straight. I'm just not picking up what I said. Janice, I noticed a tone. Can you tell me what you're trying to tell me? She said, she's been my best friend for 20 years. I've been so embarrassed by this church that I would never invite her to church. She says, well, I knew when I'd come the mess we always had up here, and I could live with it, but I wasn't going to invite my friend to it. She's been real with me, and your church people are never real with you, but this is what they're thinking. And she says, so I'm finally confident that it's going to be okay, so I've invited her to come Sunday. And then she looks at me, 75-year-old, says, but don't screw it up. I'm kind of hurt a little bit. Not quite as bad as Peter in John chapter 1, cut to the heart because the Lord had questioned him 3 times. It wasn't quite that bad, but Janice, I've been a pastor for 6 years. It took you 6 years to trust me and to trust what we're doing, to invite your friend. And you know what she said? She didn't hem-haw about it. She said yes. The lady who picked my kids up from school. It took her 6 years to trust that it wasn't going to be stupid and she was going to be embarrassed to invite her friend to church. Her husband was a deacon. She was on the finance committee. I'm not talking about some ancillary person in the church. Deeply involved in the church. She was bold enough to tell me that. Nobody's ever told me that in ministry, but you've got those people in your church right now. And it might be because of your church, or it might be because of a previous church, whatever the case might be. Now, that's 18 to 60 months, or the first major crisis or event that happens in their life. A wedding, a funeral, a car wreck, somebody's diagnosed with cancer, something positive, their son graduation, you were there for that. They invited you to come to some family reunion, and like, I don't want to go to his family reunion. I don't want to go to my family reunion, much less their family reunion. You talk about them in grace. Would you just please come? We do this singing out the back barn or something. You go there, and they're proud to tell you, hey, this is my pastor. Whatever the first major crisis or event is, that might not be count as a crisis. But now not related to Janice Davis, was Wendell Davis. I came to Birdville. I started on October the 17th, on Monday morning. I was in the office an hour and a half. And somebody comes in and says, Corabelle Davis just had a stroke. I was all of an hour and a half of being a pastor. Started that morning at 8 o'clock. At 9:30, I go to the hospital, and I just stay all day. Now, part of it is I had nothing else to do. It's my first day. What am I going to do, right? I don't have any schedules yet. I just stay half the day, 6, 8 hours. But I was Corabelle, and now she survived. She was in a wheelchair for the next 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and then she passed away. I was Wendell's pastor that day. Now, it took him a while to still trust me fully, but I was that family's pastor immediately because I was there right off the bat. But I know pastors that just say, well, I'm just not good at that. I'm not called to that. I don't know what to say. Proximity and frequency. Near your people as often as you can. At that point, and this is where I'm wrapping up, the black arrow means we're done. You have adaptive leadership. When you break through that line, wherever it is, your people will follow you. Here's my last illustration, and I'll wrap up with this. If I told y'all, we're done here now, and I'm taking everybody, and we're going to go up to Hawaiian Falls up in Round Rock. Is that what it's called? What's it called? The water park up there, right? We're going to Round Rock. What's it called? Whatever. What? Kalahari. That is what it is called. That's right. Schlitterbahns in New Braunfels. We're going to go up there. Now, I know y'all don't want to go swimming today, right? Let's just say we're going to go do that. We load up on the bus that's sitting out here in the parking lot, and I take off driving, and I get on I-35, and I start driving south. We're going to Round Rock. I start driving south. Y'all kind of like, does he know a different way? Did he get the report on the traffic? What's he doing? How far do I need to go south before somebody comes and taps me on the shoulder? Hey, Tom, you think we're going the right way? Am I going to make it to Alice? Am I going to make it to McAllen? How far down are we going to go? I'm going to be somewhere in Mexico and go, oh man, I went the wrong way. That's right. Somewhere along the way, hopefully somebody will stop me. But if we make it all that way, and tomorrow, we're here again tomorrow, and tomorrow I say, hey, we're going to Round Rock again, and we're going to load up. Now I'm driving. How many of you will tell me, hey, do you know where we're going? When you get on the bus. How many would tell me that when you get on the bus, right? Your church people will only follow you off the map if you have led on the map well. That's from this book, by the way. No, this one, Canoeing the Mountains. If you lead on the map in a bad way, where the areas that they know, if they know how to do certain things and you don't do those things well, if your strategy doesn't make any sense, they're not going to follow you into the unknown. This only works if you've led well in what they can see and know. So they will only follow you off the map if they can trust you what they've seen you do on the map.